house burned to the ground. I had nowhere to go, so I turned to the one person I raised from birth, my only son. But what he did when I arrived at his doorstep broke me in ways the fire never could. And just when I thought my story was over, someone I never expected opened a door I thought was closed forever. If you've ever felt forgotten by the ones you love most, if you've ever wondered whether second chances exist, this story is for you. Watch until the end. You won't believe how one woman's devastation led to the most unexpected reunion of her life. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love knowing how far our stories travel. They say life can change in a single breath. One moment you're standing in your kitchen thinking about dinner, and the next, you're watching 40 years of memories dissolve into flames. For me, that breath came on an ordinary Wednesday afternoon in Charlotte, North Carolina. The day began so quietly it almost mocked what was to come. The air outside was heavy with summer heat, that kind that clings to your skin and hums with cicadas. Inside, I was making my usual cup of afternoon coffee, a ritual that had followed me since my husband Robert passed away. I remember stirring in the cream, hearing the soft clink of the spoon, and thinking about how ordinary, how safe it all felt. Then I smelled something, faint, acrid, almost invisible at first, a burnt scent that didn't belong to the comfort of coffee or home. I frowned and checked the stove, half expecting to find a forgotten pot. But when I opened the living room door, I was met by a sight that froze me where I stood. A wall of smoke, thick, black, hungry. It poured through the room like a living creature, curling around the curtains and licking up the wallpaper. Flames danced up the walls fast, too fast for thought or logic. For one impossible second, I just stood there, now not moving, not believing. My mind refused to catch up to what my eyes saw. The smoke alarm should have been screaming. It wasn't. Later, I'd learned the battery had died months ago, a 10-second oversight that cost me everything I owned. I coughed, stumbled backward, my eyes burning. I remember the sound, a deep animal roar as the fire fed on wood, fabric, air, the sound of a house dying. I ran to the kitchen, grabbed my purse off the table, and tried to dial 911, but my fingers shook too badly. I couldn't see, couldn't breathe. Somewhere in the haze, I heard glass shatter, the window panes bursting from the heat. That's when instinct finally overpowered shock. I ran. The back door jammed before giving way, and I spilled out into the sunlight, gasping for air. The world outside looked cruelly bright. Blue sky, green lawns, normalcy, while behind me, everything I'd built was devoured by fire. Across the street, my neighbor Mrs. Jenkins screamed my name and rushed toward me, wrapping me in her trembling arms. I remember her voice, high, frantic, calling for help, shouting to the other neighbors, but all I could do was stare. Flames were pouring through the windows like molten ribbons. The curtains I'd sewn with Robert, the walls that had framed our laughter, our fights, our lives, all of it disappearing. Within minutes, sirens tore through the air. The fire trucks arrived, red and urgent, but by then it was too late. The heat was so intense I could feel it blistering my skin from yards away. A firefighter shouted orders, another aimed a jet of water into what used to be my living room. But water against that inferno felt like whispering into a hurricane. I stood barefoot on the sidewalk, wrapped in a blanket someone must have thrown over me, unable to move. I couldn't even cry. 42 years of my life burned down in less than an hour. The kitchen table where my son David once did his homework, the mark on the hallway wall where we measured his height every birthday, the photograph of Robert and me on our wedding day, gone. When the flames finally surrendered, only smoke remained, thick and gray and silent, curling out of a skeleton of charred beams. The fire chief, his face streaked with soot, walked over and met my eyes. He didn't have to say it. I already knew. "Ma'am," he murmured softly, "it's a total loss." Those 3 words, total loss, were more than an insurance term. They were a sentence. Everything I had left of the life I once knew now fit inside the small purse I clutched in my hands. My ID, my house keys, melted beyond use. A photo of Robert, edges singed. That night, Mrs. Jenkins took me in. Her tiny apartment was already full of grandchildren, laughter, toys scattered everywhere, but she insisted I take her bed. I lay there staring at the ceiling, listening to the soft breathing of a family that wasn't mine, feeling the numbness seep deeper into my bones. When morning came, I stepped outside and looked at what remained. Blackened walls, twisted metal, the ghost of a home. The smell of smoke clung to my hair, my clothes, even my skin. It wasn't just a house that had burned, it was a life. And as I stood there in the ruins, one thought kept echoing through my mind, louder than the crackle of dying embers. Where do you go when everything you've ever built is gone? I didn't know the answer yet, but soon I would find out. And it would begin with a phone call to the one person I believed could never turn me away, my son. I woke the next morning to a sky smeared with smoke and ash. The weight of loss did not slack in the daylight. If anything, it pressed harder. In the dim morning light, I stood among my ruined home, watching firefighters knock down smoldering walls. Shreds of carpet curled like dead blooms. Windows had surrendered. The floor sagged in places as though the ground itself wept. Some neighbors stood across the street, whispering among themselves. I recognized faces I had greeted through windows for decades. Now they stared through those same windows at emptiness. I felt a sting, not just grief, but exposure, vulnerability. Mrs. Jenkins, ever my anchor, appeared, offering a trembling cup of coffee. Her small kitchen smelled of fried eggs and yesterday's toast. I sipped, tasting comfort and loss intertwined. Her apartment was crowded, yet she made space for me like I still belonged somewhere. The American Red Cross had set up a shelter in a nearby gymnasium. My heart recoiled at the thought of sleeping among strangers, folding thin blankets on cots, the cold echo of bleachers, the fluorescent glare. It felt like mourning in public. Still, it might have to be where I landed. A neighbor, with kind eyes and a soft voice, urged me to accept help. "Take what you need, Ruby. We'll help you rebuild." But I shook my head. I couldn't imagine rebuilding when my future felt unmoored. I felt rootless, a widow who had lost her foundation. Later that morning, an insurance adjuster arrived at the blackened shell of what was once my home. He wore clean clothes and carried a clipboard. He looked out of place. He took photos, measured widths, made small notes. His voice was neutral. I followed him through the remnants, touching charred door frames, inspecting melted switches, inhaling the acrid residue that still clung to everything. "Total loss," he said again, pulling me from memory. He explained policies, depreciation, deductible, market value. He quoted a number that felt like a cruel joke. Even if I rebuilt, the payout would barely cover half of what it would take to reconstruct a home where memory mattered as much as beams. "We'll start on paperwork tomorrow," he said. "You'll need to supply receipts, inventory. Do your best to remember what was there." He patted my shoulder, a gesture meant to comfort but hollow. That night, I carried only one suitcase, my few salvageable clothes, my identification, a faded photograph of Robert. Even that felt heavy. I checked into a modest hotel, budget, sterile, impersonal. The thin mattress left my bones aching. The flickering lights and hallway conversations haunted me in the darkness. I lay awake, replaying the day's fear. The face of fire in my living room, the final portrait of Robert scorched on the wall. In the morning, I caught my reflection in the cracked mirror. My hair was dusty, my skin gray, smoke-stained. The woman staring back looked older, broken. How do you become someone who has lost everything? I didn't know. I dug into my purse and found a business card, bent and faded, Randall Galloway. My first love from 40 years ago. I'd never expected to need that card, but in that moment, it felt like one slim branch you grab when the tree is ash. His number, tattered, was still legible. I tucked it close, a secret hope. With nowhere else to go, I swallowed pride and made a call. Using Mrs. Jenkins' neighbor phone, I dialed David. I told him my house had burned, my life had been reduced to ash, and I needed a place to stay, just until I could find footing again. He told me to come. "We'll make it work," he said in that familiar voice. Relief washed over me, but it was laced with trepidation. Because I had survived fire, what if I couldn't survive rejection? The drive to his house was heavy. Everything on that road felt foreign now. Every corner, every billboard, every tree I once passed without thought. I became a stranger in my own life. When I reached his upscale neighborhood, manicured lawns, gleaming homes, I hesitated in the driveway. I gripped the doorknob of his immaculate front door, feeling its coldness, feeling the distance between us. Inside, the house was flawless. White walls, polished wood, everything arranged. His fiancée, Victoria, stood in the foyer. Her eyes flicked to me, holding questions I had no answers to. David stepped aside but remained at a measured distance. He invited me in formally, his voice calm, almost clinical. Not with mother-son warmth, but with negotiation. They expressed sympathy. They asked about the insurance. They offered guest spaces. Yet the offer felt conditional, like I was an intruder seeking charity. They said the house was their sanctuary, their privacy, their life together. She added she worried about being crowded, about disruption, about space. And David nodded. My chest tightened. I realized I was not entering home. I was asking for tolerance. I swallowed that sting and said softly, "I won't be a burden. I'll keep to myself. I just need a roof." He said nothing. She offered the guest room with a gentle hesitation, the kind of hesitation that reveals judgment. I gently laid my suitcase in the entryway. That night, I slept on unfamiliar sheets, hearing the quiet hum of air conditioners, catching whispers of secrets I couldn't belong to. From ashes to uncertainty, I had moved from my home in flames to a gilded house where I was welcome only until I became inconvenient. The next part of my journey would demand more of me than fire ever did. The morning sun felt heavier than usual as I drove toward David's neighborhood. My throat was raw from smoke, my heart raw from loss. The scenic drive uphill, the pristine lawns, the elegant homes, all of it felt unreal, as though I were intruding into someone else's life. At 65, I'd walked many paths. I never thought I'd walk this one. Each step toward my son's door weighed with fear, longing, and a fragile hope. I carried only one suitcase, shabby, worn, the only thing I had left besides the clothes I stood in. My purse held IDs, a few dollars in cash, a photograph of Robert. No treasures remained in the world that was now ashes. I had to believe in David. After all, he was my child. Even when we drifted, that bond was something I could lean on. I pulled up to his driveway and sat for a moment, chest tight. The house he and Victoria had built looked immaculate. White columns, red door, trimmed bushes. The world had moved forward, but mine had burned to the ground. I stepped out of the car, heart pounding, suitcase in hand. David opened the door before I could knock. He wore a neat shirt, slacks, polished, controlled. His surprise flickered when he saw me. His eyes shifted to Victoria behind him. The look was clinical, careful. This is motherhood introduced into the framework of their life. "Mom," he said softly, stepping aside. He gestured inward, but he hesitated. His voice had warmth, but not ease. "Come in." Inside, the house was too perfect. Clean lines, organized rooms, untouched surfaces. It was beautiful, but cold. The kind of home that says, we do things carefully, we expect things done perfectly. Victoria appeared then, her posture stiff, her lips pressed in a polite smile. She wore silk, crisp tailoring, everything calculated. She looked at my suitcase, at my soot-tinged hair, then at me. "Grace, I'm so sorry about your home," she said kindly, but in her tone I heard distance. David sat me on the couch, offering gentle hospitality, water, a soft towel to wipe my face, but each gesture felt measured, weighed, as though he was ensuring I wouldn't overstay my welcome. And in that precision, I understood something painful. I had arrived as a charity case, not as a mother asking for refuge. I told them details, how the fire started, how quickly it consumed everything, how I escaped with only my life and memories. I spoke in a quiet voice, trying not to tremble. When I paused, David leaned forward, his face folding into concern. "Do you need me to drive you somewhere? Help you file claims?" He offered money as though it were a transaction. Victoria interjected. "David and I talked. We thought maybe you'd prefer somewhere more private while you rebuild." She smiled at me sympathetically, but her eyes were cold. "We have the guest room available." I felt a pang. Guest room, as though I were visiting, as though I didn't belong. I tried to calm the sting in my voice when I replied, "I don't want to intrude. I'll keep to myself. I only needed a roof until I figure things out." David shifted in his chair. He looked at Victoria. She nodded. He looked back at me. "Very well. The guest room is yours temporarily." Temporary. The word cut me. Temporary. Like my presence was something expendable, something to be tolerated until I repaired what was broken. I placed my suitcase in the hallway and followed the hostess tour. A corridor, doors to closed rooms, carpets pristine. I felt like I was walking through someone else's life, with their shoes over their floor, in a skin that didn't belong. In the guest room, I met clean sheets, fresh towels, a pristine bed in a corner. Everything was set for someone who didn't belong there. I placed my suitcase by the bed and stood in silence, breathing it in. Strange. Alien. David knocked and entered with a folder, insurance paperwork. He sat opposite me. "I'll help with what I can," he said. "Between Victoria and me, we'll assist you until you get settled." I nodded. "Thank you." His eyes flicked to Victoria, who hovered just beyond the doorway. "If there's anything you need, clothes, food, a place to sort through things, just tell me." He spoke kindly, but kindly felt inadequate to the damage inside me. I had lost a lifetime. I stood in his immaculate cold house with nothing but trust, and trust tasted hollow. That night, I lay awake, listening to distant car engines, muffled laughter from windows, the silent luxury surrounding me. I thought of Robert's old house, the creaking floorboards, the marks our lives left on walls, the way things felt lived in. This place felt staged, curated. I missed the worn edges of a home. I rose early before the sun. I stepped into the hallway. The guest room door stood closed behind me, its confines small. I would eventually leave it, but for now, it was shelter. As I dressed, I felt the weight of the day ahead, the insurance adjuster, the paperwork, the conversations, the collapse of what felt like family trust. And I realized something. Going to my son for help was not an act of shame. It was a test, a revelation. As I walked down the hallway past polished doors and silent walls, I carried something inside me stronger than fear, the resolve that I would not be just a guest in the life that once belonged to me. Because when you lose your home, sometimes the hardest part is realizing home is more than four walls, and sometimes the heart of home is the people who let you stay. Tomorrow, I would ask more than hospitality. I would ask for dignity. Morning light filtered through sheer curtains as I sat quietly at the edge of the guest bed in David's home. The softness of the sheets, the silence of the room, they all felt alien. Everything around me whispered order and control. Everything inside me ached for home. I dressed slowly in clothes I had salvaged, a simple blouse, worn jeans, My hands still smelled faintly of smoke. The mirror showed more than my reflection. It showed a woman transformed. The smoke, the grief, the humiliation. They had marked me. I touched a streak of ash along my cheek and the mirror didn't flinch. I walked into the main living room. David and Victoria sat across from each other, faces calm, polite. No tension, no anger, just the quiet distance of a relationship tested by circumstance. Between them stood a coffee table with a stack of clean magazines and a bowl of fruit that looked untouched, like a scene set for someone else's life. David cleared his throat. "Grace, we spoke last night," he began carefully. "Victoria and we thought about it, and we believe it might be best if you found a place of your own while your home is rebuilt." He paused, expecting me to protest, but I stayed silent. He continued, voice low but steady. "This will be easier for everyone. Privacy, routine, we all have lives we need to live." Victoria leaned forward, voice soft. "It's nothing personal. It's just boundaries. Space. We thought you'd prefer it too." I felt the sting, loaded with exclusion. I swallowed, my heart pounding. "I understand," I managed. "I won't stay indefinitely." Her hand flicked to David's arm, the same motion couples make when they share unspoken concerns. I watched. Every nuance in their body language imprinted itself into me. They were maintaining a delicate balance, including me, but not fully. Supporting me, but not wholly. David nodded. "Thank you for understanding. Let's talk about timing. I can help you find a place nearby." He slid a folder across the table. It held listings, moving services, all mediated, all arranged as though my suffering were a project to be managed. I picked up one listing, a small apartment halfway across town, affordable, modest, but distant. Victoria interjected again. "We'll chip in for first month's rent, get you settled." Their words rang generous on the surface, but behind them I heard, "We'd rather not have you here." I looked up. David's face was open, well-meaning but eyes cast away from my own. Victoria's face was serene, but her shoulders stiff. I listened to them carefully. There was no cruelty, only lack of empathy, calculated concern, the logic of comfort over sacrifice. I folded the folder. "Thank you," I said softly. "I appreciate everything." Then I added, "No one asks more of me than the ones who reach the height of comfort." David's brow furrowed. He opened his mouth, but Victoria gently shook her head. The conversation ended. I gathered my suitcase and walked down the hallway toward the guest room. My steps felt hollow. Behind me, I heard the soft sound of the door closing, the resolution of a decision I didn't choose, but one I would carry forward. Inside the guest room, I stood by the window and looked out. The street beyond was calm. Trees swayed, cars rolled past, life went on. My heart ached. Not for the house I lost, for the home I thought I still had. Later, they showed me the guest room's layout. Small dresser, minimal furnishings, tight closet. I deposited my few belongings, then sat on the edge of the bed, breathing in the air of a house that wasn't mine to own. I stared at the door, at the distance between my presence and their acceptance, feeling both gratitude and heartbreak laced together. That night, I lay awake listening to sounds not my own, a clock ticking, distant television hum, doors closing on other lives. My mind drifted. I saw the charred remains of my home. I saw the face of fire in the living room. I recalled the phone call to David, the drive, the entry inside his house. Each memory piled on me like ash. I wondered, was I being fair? Should I have insisted more? But the answer came quickly. I had already lost more than anything. What I deserved now was dignity, not damage. In the darkness, I made a decision. I would not beg for my place. I would not shrink into shadows to please others. If I stayed under their roof, it would be with boundaries. If I left, it would be with my head and heart intact. When dawn came, I would begin anew. I left David's house before dawn. My suitcase slid shut with a hollow click. I walked through the dew-damp grass beside his driveway, feeling each blade under my shoes, every breath tasting of uncertainty. The world seemed quieter at that hour, as though it too waited to see what I would become. The neighborhood receded behind me, the grand homes, the polished lawns, the immaculate sidewalks. I stepped onto public streets again, where life had no script for me and nothing was guaranteed. I felt exposed, adrift, but also strangely alive. I caught a taxi to the closest hotel I could afford. It was nothing glamorous, a mid-range place with flickering hallway lights and tired carpeting. The receptionist's eyes flickered when she saw my clothes, my bag. She handed me a key. "Second floor, room 212, she said quietly. The corridor smelled faintly of old carpet and bleach. I dragged my suitcase to the door and slipped inside. The room was small. Single bed, thin blanket, a lamp screwed into the wall, mirror tilted just so. Everything felt temporary. The walls thin. The heater hummed like machinery powering some distant place. I unpacked the few things I still had, my worn jeans, the photograph of Robert, corners crumpled, my ID, my keys, a business card for Randall Galloway tucked in a pocket. I set them on the nightstand, arranging them as though I could summon stability just by placing objects neatly. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the ceiling. The hum of the HVAC, the muffled voices through the walls, the distant traffic. This was my present. I thought of how many nights I had slept in that room. Never. I had always had walls that creaked, floors that sighed, memories built into corners. Now I slept in blankness. Still, memory reached in. I recalled my old living room, the couch where Robert and I watched late movies, the coffee table etched by decades of newspaper corners, the hallway where David ran past me late at night, stumbling into teenage growth, the kitchen table where I placed meals with love, all gone. I remember Randall's face in sunshine, amber eyes warm. I remember the overlook where we'd sit and dream. That card, yellowed with age, had followed me through decades of waiting. Now I held it again. My heart hammered at the thought of calling him, of bringing that dream back into my present. Later, I ventured outside. I walked downtown, past strip malls and parking lots, past stores that never knew my name. I wandered through a small park, bench under a tree. I sat there, knees drawn up, and I let myself sob, quietly, unobtrusively. The tears I had stifled fell, the grief of loss, the grief of rejection, the grief of having to begin again at 65. I walked further into neighborhoods I used to know. Houses lent older now, paint peeling, fences sagging. I saw children riding bikes. I passed the old diner where Robert and I used to take Sunday breakfasts, the one with the red booths and checkered floors. It was still there. I sat inside, ordered black coffee. The waitress gave me a gentle look when she noticed my dusty sleeves. I drank slowly, tasting loss and nostalgia. I thought, everything's changed but memory remains. Back to the hotel before dusk, I delayed walking into that small room again. Instead, I stood on the sidewalk under a street lamp, the suitcase at my feet. The card for Randall burned in my palm. I whispered his name. The wind stirred. Silence answered. I snapped. I dialed. My fingers trembled as I prayed the line would ring, not hang up. It did. The voice said, "Randall speaking." Time paused. My heart did. Then I said, "It's Grace." He asked where I was. I told him, and I heard his footsteps. Somewhere, a car door opened. The hum of the world felt different again. I packed my things. I checked out. I looked at that hotel room once more, bed neatly made, clothes gone, ghost of my presence, and I walked out into dusk, stepping towards something I had no guarantee would be safe. But knowing I'd rather walk toward possibility than stay behind walls built by others, because on those streets, In those hotels, in those trembling memories, I discovered something vital. I was still here. And if I was still here, I still had the right to ask for home again, on my own terms. Morning light crept through the thin curtains in the modest hotel room, turning dust motes into floating specks of hope. I rubbed my eyes, every fiber of me heavy with fatigue, grief, and apprehension. But beneath those weights, something else flickered. Possibility. I sat on the edge of the bed, letting the silence stretch. My gaze drifted to the nightstand where I had placed the yellowed business card. Randall Galloway, the name faint but still legible. The ink faded but never erased in my memory. 40 years I had carried it. 40 years I never thought I would need it again. But here I was in a room full of smoke-tainted clothes and bagged memories, holding that slender strip of paper like a compass, pointing me towards something more than survival. I picked it up and turned it over in my fingers, feeling the creases, the slight curl of the edge. I traced Randall's name, the script I had once known by heart. I whispered into the still room, "If only you were still there." The voice cracked, but I didn't flinch. Then I reached for the phone. My hands trembled. What if the number no longer worked? What if he had moved, died, forgotten? But fear would not hold me back this time. I dialed. Each ring felt like a heartbeat in my ears. Slow, urgent, full of meaning. Galloway Development, Randall speaking. His voice, deeper now. Shaped by years of boardrooms and decisions, sounded distant yet familiar. The room fell away. The world paused. "Randall," I said, voice quiet but firm. "It's Grace. Grace Thorne." I paused, waiting for him to speak, to tell me this was a wrong number, but his silence held space instead. He asked gently, "Where are you?" And I told him, the city, the hotel, the address. I told him about my house burning, about being refused by my own son, about how very little I had left. My voice trembled. "I'll come get you," he said. Not "I'll see" or "maybe," but "I'll come." My heart slammed. "You don't have to," I began weakly. "Call it what it is, desperation." But he cut me off. "Grace, I'm here. Just hold on, I'll be there." I hung up and sat in stunned silence. My phone felt heavy in my hand. After decades of silence, of waiting, his voice had snapped a line across time. He had accepted that call. He was coming. I dressed quickly, packing what little remained, the clothes I'd bought, the photo of Robert, the purse with identification. In the bathroom mirror, I looked at my reflection, ash on my cheeks, wear in my eyes, but something steadier too, a pulse of determination. I left the hotel without checking out, carrying the weight of uncertainty and the buoyancy of hope together. When I stepped into the hall, each sound, the carpet underfoot, the echo of voices, the creak of doors, felt louder, sharper than it ever used. I was leaving behind more than a room. I was stepping towards someone who might remember me as more than a memory. In the car ride back toward the city, I stared out the window at passing neighborhoods, familiar houses that once felt ordinary, now haunting. I thought of David's home, the guest room, the hypocrisy of polished walls that refused a mother warmth. I thought of Randall's face and how that one call had shifted something irrevocably inside me. The car pulled up outside the hotel where I had stayed. He was there, standing under a lamppost. He wore a dark jacket, pants tailored, posture calm but electric. In that moment, my breath caught. He was not the young man I remembered, but he carried something of him in his presence. The intensity of his eyes, the steadiness of his stance. He had aged, but he had not softened. He had waited. He waited until I stepped out of the car. I walked toward him, unsteady at first, suitcase in hand. I held his gaze. The years between us stretched like a canyon, but we crossed it in a single heartbeat. He came to me, opened his arms. I stepped into them, nearly collapsing, tears streaming down my cheeks. The fullness of emotion, grief, relief, recognition, overwhelmed me. He didn't say anything at first. He held me. He whispered, "You came home." We stood there on the sidewalk, strangers reunited, tears mingling in dusk. Cars passed, the streetlights flickered, life went on. But in that moment, life refocused. The fragments of the past, the embers of memory coalesced into something sacred. He led me to his car, loading my suitcase into the trunk, holding the door for me. I sat in the passenger seat and watched his face in the rearview mirror. I saw lines I didn't recognize, strength built by years. He shifted the gears and the car moved, wheels rolling me toward a house I had never seen, toward a future I never dared imagine. As we drove through quiet neighborhoods, he said softly, "Tell me everything. I've waited to hear your voice again." I looked at him, tears in my eyes. "Nothing to spare," I whispered. And in the drive, I began. Because sometimes the fire that annihilates also clears the way. And calling across decades, reclaiming that name, was the beginning of rebuilding something real. When we finally arrived, the house stood behind a stone gate, trees arching overhead. It was elegant, confident, a home built for love, not only for show. Randall killed the engine. He opened my door. I stepped out. The air smelled of freshly turned earth, of gardens, of renewal. He said quietly, "Welcome home, Grace." And in that instant, I believed him. The sky had opened in a soft, tender rain when Randall's car slowed to a stop in front of the grand driveway. Drops slid across the windshield like tears, as though even the clouds recognized the weight of what was happening. I sat in the back seat a moment longer, heart hammering, waiting for permission. Randall stepped out first, his coat draped over his arm. He motioned for me to step forward, and as I opened the door, the first few raindrops kissed my face. I looked up at him. He was still the man I remembered, but stronger, gentler, steadier. His hair now flecked with silver, shoulders broad, but the same amber eyes. I followed him along the curved drive, suitcase rolling behind me on the wet pavement. The house appeared through the trees, its lights warm, welcoming, yet imposing. It was larger than any home I'd ever lived in, but in that moment it didn't feel cold. Randall's steps toward it were confident. When I reached the porch, he placed his hand gently on my back. I drew in a breath and walked up the steps. Inside, the foyer was quiet. The scent of wood polish and fresh flowers mingled with the patter of rain. Randall flicked on subtle lights, and the house glowed around us. He guided me deeper inside, through hallways and into a living room with soft furnishings, windows overlooking gardens, and warmth built not just into structure, but into memory. "I want you to know," he began, removing his coat and handing it to a valet closet by the door. "You never should have had to reach out like this, but I'm here now." His voice cracked gently at the end. I nodded, tears threatening. He led me to a window overlooking the rain-softened garden. I looked out, seeing trees heavy with raindrops, paths winding under lampposts. The space looked like it had waited for me, not as a guest, but as someone reclaiming a home. He turned to me, hesitant. "I never forgot you. Not once." My throat constricted. The past decades surged. All the lost letters, the unanswered questions, the silent nights clinging to memory. "I carried your card all these years," I whispered, voice small yet fierce. He reached for my hand. Everything I built, every step I made, part of it was thinking that one day you might come back, that I'd get the chance to say what I didn't before. I let his fingers hold me. The rain drummed lightly, the house's heartbeat solid underfoot. He guided me to a parlor with soft couches and a low fireplace, the faint smell of embers warming the room. "Sit," he said. "Tonight, I want to hear you. Your story, your pain, everything you've carried." I sank onto the couch. He sat beside me. Outside, rain blurred the windows. Inside, the world shrank to that room, to me, to him. I began to speak. I spoke of Robert, his kindness, our life built with simple joys. I spoke of David, his childhood laughter, the distance that grew between us. I spoke of the fire, how everything I loved was consumed in one brutal blaze. I spoke of rejection, how I stood in my son's house and felt invisible even in flesh. I whispered the fear, the shame, the ache of being cast aside when home meant more than walls. Randall listened. He never interrupted. He erased distance with the warmth of his gaze. He nodded. His jaw tightened at times when pain erupted in my voice. When I paused, he spoke softly, "I've missed you." By the time my voice faltered, trembling with the weight of decades, he moved and wrapped his arms around me. I sank into him, sobbing. The tears were not weakness. They were release. Hours passed. The fire outside had softened to a drizzling hush. Indoors, the two of us sat quietly, sometimes talking, sometimes just breathing. He showed me photographs on end tables, not fanfare images, but snapshots of gardens, of work sites, of moments he thought I might have liked. He showed me letters he saved, places he visited thinking of me. Each image carved a space between past hurt and present hope. At last, he stood and walked to a sideboard. He brought back tea and fresh cups. Small kindness. He handed me one and sat across. The fire glowed faintly. I stared at him. The man I once loved, the man I'd waited decades to see. He said, "I want you here. Not as a plan. Not as a guest, as someone who belongs, but only if you choose it." I looked at him, heart full. I realized the journey wasn't over. Trust must be built again, boundaries redrawn, fears faced. But beside him, in that brilliant living room, I felt something shift. I felt possibility. I closed my eyes and said simply, yes. Outside, the rain eased. Inside, a new beginning whispered itself into being. Morning light bathed the living room in soft warmth. For the first time in what felt like years, I woke without the weight of smoke or broken walls pressing down on me. I opened my eyes and saw the window drapes fluttering in a gentle breeze, sunlight falling across the floorboards. I was in Randall's home, his house, and the feeling was strange but real. Peace. I slipped out of bed quietly, careful not to wake him. I walked to the window and looked out. The gardens were vivid, blooming hydrangeas, paths of stone, mature trees guarding the edges. It wasn't ostentatious. It was home. He stirred behind me and came to stand beside me, his presence familiar yet new. He rested his hand on my shoulder gently. We stood in silence for a minute, watching the world outside. I thought about the fire, about David's house, about every step that led here. "You deserve all this," he said softly. I swallowed. I'm still learning what deserve means. He turned me, took my hands. "You don't need to learn. Just be here. Be with me." We stepped into the kitchen. It was roomy and warm, a hearth in modern form. He brewed coffee while I watched, the way someone watches the sun rise after darkness. He placed mugs in front of us. The aroma enveloped me. I realized how much I had missed everyday comforts, the ritual of a warm drink, the quiet between two people in a comfortable home. Over breakfast, we talked, not about rebuilding walls or relocation, but about life. I spoke of Robert, of loss, of the weight of years. He told me about his business, about decisions he made, about things he regrets. We filled gaps in each other's stories, fitting pieces together across decades of silence. Later, we walked the grounds. Randall showed me the greenhouse, the stone paths, a small pond he had built. He spoke with pride, but not brag. There was tenderness in how he described details, places he imagined sharing with me, a bench beside a fountain, an arbor where roses would climb, a path lit by lanterns. I followed his gaze, letting the image settle in me. I felt a future unfolding before my eyes, not perfect, not free of pain, but full of possibility. That evening, David called. My phone rang while Randolph and I were cooking together. I watched Randall's expression shift, then turned to me. "You want me to take this?" he asked gently. I said, "Yes." He handed me the phone. I exhaled. "Hello, David." His voice came through awkward, softened. "Mom, I heard where you are. I'm sorry. I realized what we said, what we did." I closed my eyes, felt the old ache, the old longing. Then I opened them. I spoke clearly. "David, I have a home now, one that accepts me, one that sees me. I'm not asking. I'm telling you how I feel." There was a pause. Then, "Mom, I didn't understand." "I do now. Can we meet?" I looked over at Randall, whose presence steadied me. I said, "Yes." In the days that followed, David and I met over coffee. We sat across from each other in neutral territory. He apologized for the coldness, the distance, the pride that let him dismiss his mother. I told him what his rejection had felt like. He listened, tears forming. We didn't solve everything that day, but we reopened a door, one I thought closed. Back at home with Randall, I felt whole. I cooked dinner for us. He smiled at me as I placed the plate on the table. "You've got a touch with this," he said. The compliment fluttered in my chest. I realized how little that voice had been used, that someone saw me, appreciated me, invited me to matter. In those weeks, people asked, "Are you moving in? What will you do with insurance money? What about David?" I welcomed questions, but my answers were always calm. "I'm living here. I'll figure the rest." I visited the site of my old house once, with Randall. He came quietly beside me as I walked through charred remains, fenced off by caution tape. I touched a scorched beam. I whispered goodbyes to walls that no longer held memories. He held me steady. We stood, two silhouettes against ruin, and then walked out together. At times, I worried about the past's shadow, what David would say, what Victoria might attempt, what doubt might creep in. But each time I turned that worry around, I found the present anchoring me. A home built not only with bricks, but with respect, love, renewed hope. One evening, under lanterns on my veranda, Randall found me staring at the sky. I looked up at constellations, small, bright. He came beside me, he held me. "Did you ever think you'd come back here?" he asked. I shook my head. "Never." He kissed my hair. "Well, you're here now." I leaned into him. The journey from ashes to home was not over. Hearts still heal, wounds still close slowly. But here, under stars and soft lights, I believed in the possibility of tomorrow. Because sometimes rebuilding a life doesn't mean forgetting the fire. It means choosing to plant seeds again, in soil scorched, yes, but fertile with what remains. Home is not only where you arrive. Sometimes it's what you become along the way. The days that followed felt like waking into a new world. Some mornings I would open my eyes and for a heartbeat forget the fire, forget being a guest, forget loss. And then I'd remember. But I would also remember this. I had been given possibility. Randall and I settled into life together at his home. I moved into the guest suite that soon became mine. I arranged photos. I unpacked the little things I still had. A teacup from my mother, a framed photo of Robert, a small stack of letters I never threw away. I gave those items space in his house, so my past would not be buried but honored. We developed routines, breakfast on the veranda, walks through the garden, quiet evenings by the fireplace. He listened patiently when I spoke of the fire, of David, of all the years I'd carried waiting. Sometimes I cried. Sometimes I laughed. Sometimes we sat in silence, understanding that healing doesn't always require words. David called more often. The tone softened. No demands, just inquiries. How I was, what I was doing, what I needed. Once he asked, "Do you feel at home with him?" I told him, "Yes, I feel seen." The pause on the phone told me more than I needed. He said, "I'm proud of you, Mom." Victoria, too. Reached out. Tentative, apologetic. She invited me to lunch. I accepted. We sat across from each other in a quiet cafe. She apologized again. I accepted because kindness is not weakness. I told her I was healing. She listened. We parted with a nod. Not full restoration, but space opened. The business of rebuilding took time. The insurance claim came through eventually. Randall helped me oversee construction, design, repairs. I walked through architectural plans, interior layouts, garden paths. I chose colors, light fixtures, the direction windows would face. Each decision felt empowering, a reclamation. On the day the new structure stood as walls and windows, we held a housewarming. I invited Mrs. Jenkins, a few neighbors, and David. David came alone, hesitant, but came. He looked around at the walls I had helped choose, the garden Randall had planted, the room I now inhabited. His eyes moistened. I greeted him warmly. He hugged me. It felt like home. That night, Randall and I sat in our living room, quiet music playing. I turned to him, tears in my eyes. The fire took everything I thought defined me, but you taught me that home is more than things. Home is seeing and being seen. He clasped my hand. You came home, he repeated softly. In the months that followed, we navigated life together. My health sometimes protested, and my age reminded me of fragility. But I felt strength I hadn't known. I traveled again. I reconnected with old friends. I wrote, spoke, shared my story with women who had lost more than homes, lost faith. David visited, without pressure. He brought flowers. He sat with us at dinner. We did not pretend the past was erased, but we carried forward. Victoria joined in family meals sometimes. We spoke of boundaries, forgiveness, and the respect that rebuilds trust over time. Years later, from my porch, I would watch sunrises and remember the flames, the smoke, the betrayal, all became part of my story, not the whole. Randall often squeezed my hand and said, "I love you more now than I ever dared back then." And I believed him. In the epilogue of my life, I learned, losing your past doesn't mean losing your future. Sometimes the embers of disaster are the crucible from which you emerge. Sometimes love, delayed by decades, arrives just in time to remind you that you deserve shelter, not only of stone and roof, but of heart and soul. I framed Randall's business card on my desk, a symbol not of longing, but of survival and patience. I placed a note beside it, "Some promises are worth the wait." If this is what redemption looks like, I know now it's not about perfect closure. It's about small steps, warmth in mornings, holding hands through storms, saying, "I was wrong and I'm sorry," and allowing healing to thread through conversation, through silence. It's about claiming dignity after devastation. My house burned down. Everything I built fell to ash. But in the ruin, I found something I never fully allowed myself to dream: a new love, a new home, a new chapter. I did not simply survive. I came alive again. I wake to quiet sunlight filtering through new curtains, casting gentle patterns on the floorboards. The smell of fresh air replaces the smoke I once carried in my bones. For the first time in what feels like a long time, I live in a house where I'm not haunted by loss, but by hope. I slip out of bed and walk to the kitchen, where Randall is already brewing coffee. He offers me one of the mugs he picked out, and I accept, feeling the warmth seep into my hands, then into my heart. He watches me quietly, his eyes bright but calm. That look, the one that says, "You are home." Over breakfast, we talk, not about the fire, not about pain, but about small things. The layout of the garden, the colors of the walls, the plan to plant hydrangeas by the walkway. I describe my old home, the smell of wood, the weight of memories. He listens, nods, asks gentle questions. No pity, only presence, only love. In the weeks that follow, the edges of my past soften. I go through boxes of charred keepsakes with him, salvaging what I can. The items are fragile: letters, photographs, a teacup. We talk about each piece, what it meant, why it survived. We place some in frames, others we carry memory of and let go of the rest. David calls more often now. The tone is warmer, less measured. He shares work updates, asks after my health, sends photos of his life. One evening I invite him over. At first he hesitates, then arrives with a bouquet of daisies. We sit together, Randall quietly in the next room, and I see my son again, tentative, a little ashamed, but present. His apology is soft. "Mom, I never knew how to protect you." I take his hand. "You're here now," I tell him. Victoria, too, reaches out. She sends a note asking forgiveness for her part in my hurt, saying she wants to understand. I reply with calm gratitude. When we finally meet, I tell her I forgive, not to heal old wounds immediately, but to free myself from carrying stones in my heart. Rebuilding the house begins. Randall and I review blueprints. I choose light fixtures, countertops, paint. He respects my voice. Together we walk through the structure that will carry new memories. I take comfort in the walls rising, in the beams, in the promise that this home will not be a monument to the past, but a vessel for the future. One evening, under string lights in the backyard, I look across at Randall. He stands behind me, hands in pockets, watching the garden he built. I turn to him. "I lost everything," I say, "but you reminded me that some things can't burn. Love, dignity, the right to be seen." He steps close, brushing a strand of gray hair behind my ear. "You came home," he says again, and this time I believe him from the depths of my soul. At night, I wander the halls of our home, pausing in rooms where I once felt broken. Now I walk with confidence, the floor underfoot, the walls surrounding me, the window opening to the garden. In a small study, I frame Randall's old business card, the one I saved for decades. I place it beside my journal. It is a reminder of the patience in waiting, the power in resilience, and the love that waited through years. I think often of the fire, of standing in ashes, of the door my son refused to open. Those memories remain, but they do not define me. I have become more than destruction ever was. I have found grace in rising, strength in rebuilding. Sometimes David visits. Sometimes Victoria meets me at the front hall. We walk rooms, share coffee. We do not rush reunion. We rebuild trust slowly, but I no longer wait in the shadows. I stand in the light. And so, my story ends, not with closure, but with emergence. I am older, yes. Worn, yes. Scars remain, but I also have a voice again, a home filled with warmth, a man who sees me, a son learning to see me too. If someone hears this, carries a hidden card, a memory, a promise, know this: even after flames, even after denial, there is possibility. You are not defined by the fire that consumed your past. You are defined by how you rebuild your tomorrow. My house burned down. My son turned me away. But first love answered the call, and now I am home again. Sometimes life doesn't burn us to punish us. It burns to clear a path. What Grace lost in flames, she found again in love. Not the kind born from obligation, but one rooted in history, in soul, in promise. Her son shut the door, but fate opened a better one. This isn't just a story about fire, betrayal, or even reunion. It's about resilience. It's about finding your voice again, even when the world tells you to stay quiet. And it's a reminder, sometimes the people we loved long ago are still waiting for us to come home. Which part of this story touched your heart the most? Let's talk in the comments. If this story moved you, send a super thanks to support more powerful, true life-inspired tales like this one. Stick around. 2 more unforgettable life stories are waiting for you on screen now. Until next time, with love, with truth, and with the courage to begin again. See you in the next life story.